My attention-craving brother faked having cancer. I exposed him publicly, but my family still took his side, so I dug deeper and found out why they defended him so hard. Ever since I was little, all I wanted was to be best friends with my big brother Augustin. I copied everything he did, from the sports he played to the video games he liked. I even started dressing just like him, begging my mom for the same brand of sneakers and hoodies. But instead of wanting to hang out, Augustin started treating me like his biggest enemy. Every time he came home with a trophy from basketball or skateboarding, or whatever new thing I had just started doing too, he would hunt me down. "Bet you'll never be this good, loser," he'd yell, shoving the trophy right in my face. But I never got mad or jealous. I'd just give him a big hug and tell him how proud I was. This only made him angrier, and he'd push me away so hard I'd stumble back, sometimes falling right on the floor. I didn't give up trying to be his friend until my 13th birthday, because that's when everything changed. My parents got me a custom skateboard with a sick dragon graphic, the exact one Augustin had been wanting all year. The second I unwrapped it, I ran to his room and banged on the door. When I showed him, I asked if he wanted to be the first one to ride it. "Yeah, sure," he said with a weird smirk on his face. He said he wanted to test it on the street out front. Since he was 17, I figured he knew what he was doing. But instead of getting on it, he locked eyes with me, then threw it into the road just as a delivery truck sped by, crushing it into 100 pieces. My heart shattered. In that moment, I felt like I stopped being a kid. I promised myself I would never tell him about anything good in my life ever again. 2 years later, when I was 15, I won the state science fair with a robot I built. Augustine hadn't left for college yet, so he heard our parents talking about it at dinner. I was shocked when, instead of getting angry, he asked if he could come to the awards ceremony. I said yes right away, thinking maybe, just maybe, he wanted to fix things between us. On the day of the event, the principal was on stage calling out the winners. He went from third place to first, but he never got to my name. Right before he could say it, Augustin all at once collapsed, grabbing his chest and gasping for air. Everyone turned to look at our family, asking if he was okay. He stayed on the floor until we could hear ambulance sirens getting closer. Then he jumped up like nothing happened. "Oh man, I'm fine, everyone," he shouted. "I just forgot to eat breakfast." Everyone was so glad he was okay, but I just shook my head, knowing exactly what he'd done. After that, I kept everything secret, not just from Augustine, but from my parents and all my relatives too. Life got really lonely. It was so hard not to run and tell my parents when something good happened, but I knew I couldn't trust them to keep it from him. When I turned 18, I got into MIT for engineering. My parents found the acceptance letter in the mail before I got home. When I walked in the door, my mom screamed, "Sweetie, we are so happy for you." They right away started taking pictures of me holding the letter to post all over their social media. For the first time in years, I let them be happy for me. I figured Augustin was away at his own college, so there was nothing he could do to ruin this. I was wrong, again. The next morning, my parents barged into my room and started throwing my stuff into garbage bags. "Your brother just found out he has brain cancer," my mom said, her voice shaking. "He needs one room for all the medical tools and one to rest in." My dad was standing behind her, openly crying. I knew right away he was lying, but I needed proof. Augustine came home that afternoon with a big grin on his face. His head was fully shaved. That was weird, because I'd seen a video of him playing basketball with his friends just last week, and he had a full head of hair, but he just went to his new room and laid down, saying the cancer made him tired. That night, I made his favorite pasta, trying to make him feel secure and like I believed his story. After 2 weeks of me sleeping on the living room couch, Augustine decided to throw a party to celebrate his bravery. He invited everyone we knew, including a bunch of kids from my high school class. It was perfect. Halfway through the party, I tapped my soda can with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "Augustine should give a speech," I announced. "We're all so proud of you." He right away launched into the speech I'd heard him practicing in the bathroom mirror at least 10 times. He was in the middle of his fake crying when I walked up and gave him a tight hug. Just as I pulled away, I grabbed the edge of the bald cap and ripped it off his head. His brown hair tumbled down past his ears. Augustine screamed. My mom made a gasping sound, like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. While everyone stood there in shock, I turned on the big TV and cranked the volume. I played a video I'd secretly recorded of Augustin practicing his cancer speech in the mirror when he thought nobody was home. Instead of finally admitting what he did, he just stormed out of the house and drove off. I went up to my room and let my parents deal with telling all the guests to leave. The next morning, I woke up to my mom slapping me hard across the face. "How could you embarrass your brother like that while he's fighting cancer?" she screamed. I just stared at her, fully numb. "He told us that was a hairpiece, you moron." My cheek burned where her hand had connected, but what hurt more was the realization that my parents had chosen to believe Augustin's lies over the evidence right in front of them. I touched my face gently, feeling the heat radiating from the red mark that was surely forming. Augustin appeared in my doorway, leaning against the frame with that same smirk he'd worn when he destroyed my skateboard 5 years ago. He crossed his arms, watching as Mom continued her tirade about how I'd humiliated a cancer patient in front of everyone we knew. I pulled out my phone to show them the video evidence again, but Augustin stepped forward calmly. He spoke in a measured tone, explaining that recording someone without their consent in a private residence was illegal. The specific legal terms rolled off his tongue: invasion of privacy, unlawful surveillance, potential criminal charges. My stomach dropped as I realized he'd already consulted a lawyer about this. When I scrambled to my closet and retrieved the bald cap I'd kept as evidence, Augustin revealed he'd been documenting everything too. He showed our parents videos on his phone of what he called my aggressive behavior at the party. The footage was real, but edited to remove context, showing me grabbing him but not the cap removal, showing his shocked face but not the fake speech practice video I'd played. Dad's expression wavered when I pointed out the basketball video timeline didn't match his supposed chemotherapy schedule. For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him, but Augustin produced a folder of medical documents, all dated weeks before the party. The letterheads looked authentic, the signatures convincing. My hands shook as I realized the depth of his preparation. I had to make a choice: call the police about Mom hitting me, or try one more time to convince them. But looking at their faces, Mom's fury, Dad's tears, Augustin's satisfaction, I knew they were lost to me. I turned and started throwing clothes into my backpack, grabbing only essentials. When I reached for my passport in my desk drawer, my fingers found only empty space. It had been there yesterday. My phone buzzed. MIT admission conditions. My heart raced as I read their message expressing concern about recent events and requesting immediate contact regarding my enrollment status. I looked up to find Augustin watching me read it, that familiar smirk widening. He explained how he'd sent them the party video, carefully edited to show me attacking him. He'd written them about my history of violent tendencies and included screenshots of old social media posts taken out of context. While he talked, Mom demanded I hand over my phone and laptop, saying I'd lost the privilege of unsupervised internet access. I clutched my phone tighter and backed toward my window. The screen showed another notification. The MIT email was already marked as read, though I'd just opened it. Augustine had access to my accounts. I shoved the phone in my pocket and pushed open the window, knowing I needed my birth certificate and social security card from my parents' safe before I could truly leave. But the combination had been my birthday. Had been. They'd changed it yesterday, Mom mentioned at dinner. Augustine pulled out more papers, these ones with my parents' signatures, medical proxy documents, power of attorney forms, all naming him as my emergency decision maker due to what the papers called my mental health crisis. My parents nodded along as he explained how this was for my own good. My phone vibrated again. Mara, my best friend since elementary school, her mom, who'd been my favorite teacher, was asking questions about my history of lying. The walls felt like they were closing in. I needed air, needed space to think. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door, but Augustin blocked my path. That's when I spotted something in the recycling bin by his feet, medical letterhead poking out from under newspapers. I lunged for it, managing to grab the papers before he could stop me. Real medical documents, but not about cancer. A letter from his college dated last month. Academic dismissal for failing grades. Termination from his work-study program. Everything dated before his supposed diagnosis. I thrust the papers at my parents, but Mom wouldn't even look. She kept saying I was sick, that I needed help. Dad put his hand on my shoulder, not in comfort, but to hold me still. Augustine suggested they'd found a nice facility that specialized in teenage behavioral issues. He'd already made some calls. The word facility sent ice through my veins. I twisted away from Dad's grip and ran for the stairs. Behind me, I heard Augustine calmly telling them not to chase me, that I'd come back when I had nowhere else to go. The front door slammed behind me as I sprinted into the morning air, my backpack bouncing against my spine. Grandmother's house was only 6 blocks away. She'd always been the reasonable one, the one who saw through family drama. My legs burned as I ran, my mind racing through everything I'd need to prove my case. The bald cap was still in my pocket. The dismissal letter was crumpled in my fist. I had the original video on my phone. Grandmother would believe me. Her front door was unlocked, like always. I burst in calling her name, finding her in the kitchen making tea, but her face when she saw me wasn't relief or concern. It was disappointment. She'd already gotten a call from Augustine about my breakdown. He'd warned her I might show up with wild stories. While I tried to explain, my phone lit up with notification after notification. Augustine was posting on social media, sharing old photos from when I was 8 and had tantrums about losing at board games. Photos from when I was 10 and cried because he'd hidden my science project. Each post talked about my lifelong jealousy issues and how he'd tried so hard to be a good brother despite my problems. I tried to call MIT admissions to explain, but halfway through dialing, my phone screen went black. Service disconnected. Mom and Dad had cut off my phone plan. Grandmother's laptop was on the kitchen table, and I lunged for it, but she closed it gently, suggesting I take some time to calm down first. The walk to the library felt like a funeral march. Every neighbor I passed seemed to be looking at their phones, probably seeing Augustine's posts. At the library, I finally got onto a computer and logged into my email. 23 new messages. Most were from MIT, but buried among them was something worse. Paperwork my parents had filed making Augustine my official emergency contact at MIT. The forms were dated 2 weeks ago, before the party, before any of this. My friends weren't responding to messages. When I checked their social media, I found out why. Augustine had sent them screenshots of poetry I'd written in middle school after our dog died. Dark, dramatic stuff about feeling alone and misunderstood. Normal teenage angst, but presented without context. It looked disturbing. I created a fake account to message Sarah, Augustine's ex-girlfriend from last year. She'd broken up with him suddenly. Wouldn't tell anyone why. Maybe she knew something. I typed carefully, explaining who I was, and asking if we could talk about Augustine. Her response came quickly, but it wasn't to me. She screenshotted my message and posted it publicly, tagging Augustine. Your sibling is now harassing me. This is getting scary. Augustine reshared it immediately, adding commentary about how he was worried I might hurt someone. The post already had dozens of sympathetic comments. By the time I noticed the local news blog had picked up the story, it was too late to do damage control. MIT student bullies cancer-stricken brother, read the headline. The embedded video was from the party, edited to show me attacking Augustine, but not revealing the bald cap. In the comments, someone pointed out the edit points in the metadata, but their comment was buried under hundreds of others calling me a monster. My library session timed out. When I tried to log in again, the librarian informed me my card had been suspended due to family concerns about my mental state. I left before she could call anyone, Augustine's preparation becoming clearer with each obstacle. He'd been planning this since my MIT acceptance arrived, maybe longer. I found myself at the park where Augustine and I used to play as kids. My phone, even without service, still connected to public Wi-Fi. More notifications flooded in. Augustine was at my grandmother's house now, bringing her groceries and crying about how he just wanted our family to be together again. The photo showed her hugging him, his face turned toward the camera with just the hint of a smile. Jake, one of Augustine's friends from high school, was sitting on the basketball court. I approached carefully, recording on my phone. When I asked about Augustine's cancer, Jake laughed. He went on about how Augustine had joked about faking illness to get out of telling his parents about failing college. But Augustine was smart. Every admission was preceded by, hypothetically speaking, or wouldn't it be funny if? I thought I'd finally gotten real evidence until Jake's phone buzzed. His face changed as he read the message. He warned Augustine was asking if anyone had been spreading lies about him. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Augustine, defamation is a serious crime. So is harassment. Stop now. Standing there in the park where we'd once played together, I made a decision. My family was at counseling. Augustine had posted about it, asking for prayers for our healing journey. The house would be empty. I needed his laptop, needed to find what else he'd been planning. scanning. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I was out of options. The spare key was still under the fake rock where it had always been. Walking into my own home felt like trespassing. Everything looked the same but felt foreign, like a movie set of my life. I headed straight for Augustin's room, formerly my room, still scattered with my things shoved into corners. His laptop was on the desk, password protected, but I knew him. The password would be something that made him feel superior. I tried variations of winner, champion, the best, nothing. Then, on instinct, I typed my MIT student ID number. The screen unlocked. What I found made my blood run cold. Folders within folders of documentation. Screenshots of every achievement I'd ever posted online. Copies of my college applications. Medical articles about personality disorders and manipulation tactics. A draft email to MIT dated 3 months ago, never sent, outlining concerns about my mental stability. He'd been building this case since before I even got accepted. I scrolled through more files, each one more damning than the last. Augustin had documented every time I'd gotten upset as a child, every argument we'd had, every achievement I'd earned that he hadn't. There were photos of me at various ages, all captioned with psychological terminology he'd researched. My hands trembled as I opened a folder labeled Phase 2. The front door slammed. My heart stopped. Footsteps on the stairs. I closed the laptop and shoved it under his bed, then dove into his closet just as he entered the room. Through the slats, I watched him look around suspiciously before sitting at his desk. He pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly. My own phone vibrated in my pocket. I held my breath, praying he hadn't heard it. Another vibration, then another. Augustin stood up and walked toward the closet. I pressed myself against the back wall behind his hanging clothes. The door opened. He grabbed a jacket, his hand inches from my face, then closed it again. I waited until I heard his car leave before emerging. The laptop was gone from under the bed. Of course he'd known I was there. My phone showed dozens of new notifications. Augustin had posted about finding me breaking into the family home and how he was scared for his safety. The post included a photo of my shoes visible under his closet door. Outside, I noticed my high school friend Emma walking her dog. I ran to catch up with her, desperate for someone who might listen. But when she saw me approaching, her face went pale. She quickly crossed the street, pulling out her phone. Minutes later, Augustin posted a photo with Emma, his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "So grateful for friends who check on me during this difficult time. My part-time job at the hardware store was my only source of income. I showed up for my shift, hoping to earn enough for a motel room. The manager met me at the door with a concerned expression. He explained that my parents had called about my mental health crisis and suggested I take some time off, suspended indefinitely, pending review. I sat in my car in the parking lot, scrolling through my bank account. $300. That was all I had. A notification popped up. Augustin had tagged me in a post about supporting loved ones with mental illness. The comments were full of people praising him for being such a caring brother. That night, I slept in my car behind an abandoned strip mall. I woke to someone tapping on the window. Tyler, the 8-year-old from next door, was standing there with his older sister. He pressed his face against the glass and asked why I was sleeping in my car. Before I could answer, his sister pulled him away, but not before he mentioned that Augustin had promised him my gaming console when you go away to get better. I drove to the courthouse, determined to file a restraining order. The clerk handed me the forms, but as I started filling them out, she frowned at her computer screen. She informed me that a restraining order had already been filed against me by Augustine for stalking and harassment. The hearing was set for next week. My phone buzzed with an email from MIT. 72 hours to address their behavioral concerns, or my enrollment would be terminated. I needed evidence, real evidence, not just recordings that could be dismissed as taken out of context. I remembered something. 2 years ago, Augustin had gone to therapy briefly after a bad breakup. He'd mentioned it once when he was hammered. The therapist's office was downtown. Maybe they'd have records that could help. But when I arrived, I discovered Augustin volunteering at the reception desk. He looked up with that familiar smirk, explaining to his coworker that I was his troubled sibling who might show up with paranoid delusions. The receptionist's hand moved toward the phone, ready to call security. I left quickly and sat in the public library parking lot, using their Wi-Fi to check my email. More messages from MIT, each one more urgent. My college fund access had been restricted. A notification from the bank said it was for my protection at my parents' request. Augustin had posted a screenshot of my college essay where I'd written about my fear of failure, adding his own commentary about my fragile mental state. Emma texted me finally. My heart leaped until I read the message. She was concerned about my paranoid accusations against Augustine. So were grandmother and dad. All 3 messages arrived at exactly 3:47 p.m. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidence. I decided to fight back using Augustin's own tactics. I created a fake charity donation in his name to a cancer research foundation, knowing they'd call to thank him. But when I tried to process the payment at the bank, the teller, one of Augustin's friends from high school, mentioned my concerning behavior while counting out the bills. She made a phone call while I waited, speaking in hushed tones. I abandoned the donation plan and withdrew my remaining savings in cash, $250. As I left the bank, I noticed Augustin's car in the parking lot. He wasn't inside it, but something on the passenger seat caught my eye. Medical papers. Real ones. I used a coat hanger from my trunk to unlock his car. The papers were from a psychiatric evaluation from 2 years ago. Personality disorder, manipulative tendencies, lack of empathy. I photographed everything with my phone, finally having real evidence. But as I closed the car door, Sarah appeared with a security guard. She accused me of breaking into vehicles, said she'd seen me do it. The security guard asked for my ID while Sarah smiled coldly. She mentioned something about Augustin helping with her custody battle, how grateful she was for his support. I ran. The security guard didn't chase me, but I knew Sarah had probably filmed everything. Sure enough, within minutes, Augustin posted about me breaking into cars and how he was worried I might hurt someone. Sarah commented immediately, confirming she'd witnessed it. The motel room cost $60 a night. I had enough for 3 nights, maybe 4 if I didn't eat. I sat on the stained bedspread, looking at the photos of Augustin's psychiatric evaluation. Even with this evidence, who would believe me now? I'd been painted as unstable, dangerous, criminal. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered desperately, hoping it was someone who could help. Instead, Augustin's voice came through, calm and measured. He offered me a deal. Admit to having mental health issues, agree to treatment under his supervision, and I could keep my MIT acceptance. Refuse, and he'd make sure I never got into any college anywhere. I hung up on him. Within minutes, my email showed a new message. Augustine had filed a competency petition with the court. My parents had already signed it. The hearing was in 5 days. I spent the next morning at the public library, researching everything I could about competency hearings and psychiatric holds. The librarian kept glancing at me nervously. I realized I probably looked exactly like what Augustine was painting me as. Disheveled, desperate, obsessively researching legal documents. A memory surfaced. When I was 10, I'd had anxiety attacks after Augustine locked me in the basement during a thunderstorm. My parents had taken me to therapy for a few months. Those medical records existed. Augustine had built his entire narrative on that kernel of truth. I drove past my old middle school and saw Augustine's car in the parking lot. He was volunteering at an assembly about mental health awareness. Through the window, I could see him on stage, probably telling his version of our story. The principal stood beside him, nodding sympathetically. That afternoon, I discovered Augustine had befriended Emma's parents. Her mother had offered him their garage apartment while he dealt with family stress. Emma had to choose between believing me or keeping her family's peace. When she blocked my number, I understood her choice, even as it hurt. I created a new social media account to share the photos of Augustine's psychiatric evaluation, but his preemptive mental health awareness campaign had been too effective. People commented that I was victim-blaming and stigmatizing mental illness. Someone pointed out that I'd used my own words about keeping achievement secret as evidence of my paranoid tendencies. The MIT deadline was approaching. 48 hours left. I sat in a grocery store parking lot trying to compose an email to the admissions office. But what could I say that wouldn't sound like the ravings of someone having a breakdown? Augustine appeared at my car window, placing a bouquet of flowers on the windshield. He stepped back, hands raised peacefully, while security cameras captured the whole interaction. He'd left a note about forgiveness and getting help. I crumpled it up and threw it at him, which probably looked terrible on camera. At the grocery store, I was buying bread and peanut butter with my dwindling cash when Augustine entered. He walked past my aisle and suddenly collapsed, clutching his stomach. He gasped something about being poisoned, pointing in my direction. Customers rushed to help him while giving me suspicious looks. The security footage from that aisle was mysteriously corrupted when the manager tried to review it, but Augustine's performance had been convincing enough. I was banned from all the grocery stores in the chain. The security guard already had my photo printed out, ready to post it. Living in my car was taking its toll. I parked in different locations each night, always worried someone would call the police. One morning, grandmother found me in the church parking lot. She sat in my passenger seat and asked a simple question that shattered me. What if you're wrong about everything? The way she phrased it, the exact words. I knew Augustine had coached her, but the doubt in her eyes was real. For the first time, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I always had been. I broke into Sarah's apartment that night. I'm not proud of it. I needed the custody documents she'd mentioned. Needed to prove she was lying about me being violent with children. Her kids were asleep. The youngest woke up and saw me at the window. The terror in her eyes made me realize what I'd become. Sarah's daughter had an anxiety attack. Neighbors called the police. I ran before they arrived, but the damage was done. I was becoming exactly what Augustine painted me as. Desperate, criminal, dangerous. Sarah posted about the break-in immediately, and Augustine shared it with comments about his worst fears coming true. The competency hearing was moved up 48 hours now, after my break-in confession to prove my sanity had backfired spectacularly. Augustine's lawyer had filed an emergency motion. The MIT deadline would pass before the hearing. I found Aunt Martha's storage unit key in my car's glove compartment. I'd forgotten I had it. She died last year under strange circumstances, leaving me a small inheritance that never materialized. Augustine had been her caregiver in her final months. The storage unit smelled like dust and old memories. Boxes of Aunt Martha's belongings were stacked haphazardly. In one box, I found her journal. The entries from her last year were troubling. She wrote about suspecting Augustine of stealing from her, but she also mentioned my troubling behavior when I'd visited. Had Augustine manipulated her too, or was there truth to her concerns? I photographed pages showing Augustine had been stealing from her estate. Financial records proved it, but using this evidence would mean admitting to breaking into the storage unit, adding another crime to my growing list. The MIT deadline passed while I sat in that storage unit, surrounded by a dead woman's possessions. The email came through at exactly noon. Due to concerning reports about your character and behavior, we are withdrawing our offer of admission. My dream, achieved and then lost in a matter of weeks. Augustine texted immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He offered a gap year recovery program that he would oversee. The real battle was beginning, not for MIT, but for my basic freedom. I decided to use his tactics against him. I planted evidence of substance use in his car, knowing it was wrong, but feeling I had no choice. The small victory of delaying the hearing came at the cost of my integrity. My parents now saw me as the manipulative liar Augustine had always claimed I was. Down to my last $100, I slept in Augustine's storage unit that night. Among the boxes, I found photos suggesting Aunt Martha's death wasn't natural, medical equipment that shouldn't have been there, prescription bottles with Augustine's name on them. I was documenting everything when I heard footsteps outside. The unit door rolled up, and Augustine stood there with a security guard. He explained I was his mentally ill sibling who had been stalking him. The guard asked me to leave while Augustine gathered the photos I'd found, slipping them into his jacket pocket. My phone showed 3 days until the competency hearing. My lawyer had withdrawn, citing a conflict of interest that I suspected Augustine had orchestrated. Every small victory had created a new legal vulnerability. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was now inadmissible because of how I'd obtained it. I made one last desperate attempt. I confronted Augustine outside our parents' house, threatening to expose what he'd done to Aunt Martha if he didn't confess. The words came out wrong, sounding like threats of violence. I didn't see him recording until it was too late. He played the recording for our parents immediately. They called the police while Augustine stood behind them, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. Every defensive action I'd taken had become a weapon in his hands. I was no longer the victim in anyone's eyes. I was the perpetrator. As police sirens wailed in the distance, I ran to my car. The competency hearing loomed in 2 days. I had no lawyer, no money, no allies, and a growing list of crimes attached to my name. Augustine had won every battle, and the war for my freedom was nearly lost. But in my pocket, I still had one photo from Aunt Martha's storage unit, a medical alert bracelet for a severe allergy. The same allergy listed on her death certificate. The same allergy Augustine had. It wasn't much, but it was something. The final confrontation was coming, and we both had enough evidence to destroy each other. The question was whether anyone would be left standing when the dust settled. The police sirens grew louder as I fumbled with my car keys. My hands shook so badly I dropped them twice before managing to start the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw Mom and Dad standing on the porch with Augustine between them, his arm draped protectively around Mom's shoulders. I drove aimlessly for hours, burning through my last tank of gas. The photo of Aunt Martha's medical alert bracelet felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled into a rest stop and spread out everything I'd managed to save on the passenger seat. Financial records showing I'd been the beneficiary of a life insurance policy worth $30,000. Documents with my signature from when I was 17. I remembered signing them, Augustine telling me they were for college financial aid. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He'd used my trust to steal from me before I even knew there was money to steal. My signature on those documents, authentic and willing, had enabled him to cash out the policy after Aunt Martha died. The death certificate I'd photographed showed cause of death as anaphylactic shock, the same severe peanut allergy listed on Augustine's medical alert bracelet. I sat there in the dark rest stop, understanding the full scope of what I was dealing with. If I used this evidence, I'd have to admit to breaking into the storage unit, stealing documents, and violating the restraining order. But without it, I'd face the competency hearing empty-handed. The next morning, I made my choice. I drove to our parents' house knowing they'd be at work. Augustine's car was gone too. I parked down the street and walked to the front door, my heart pounding. I needed to leave the evidence where they'd find it. Needed them him to see the truth without me having to admit how I'd obtained it. But Augustine was already there, sitting on the porch steps like he'd been waiting. He held up his phone, showing me he was already recording. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, the folder of evidence clutched in my hands. I told him I knew what he'd done to Aunt Martha. Told him I had proof about the insurance money, about her death. The words tumbled out, getting more desperate as he just sat there smiling. Finally, in frustration, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I told him that if he didn't confess, I'd do to him what he'd done to her. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd lost. Augustine's smile widened as he saved the recording. He stood up calmly and walked inside, leaving me standing there with evidence that was now worthless. Within minutes, I heard him inside, his voice carrying through the open window as he played the recording for our parents over speakerphone. I ran back to my car as Dad burst through the front door, phone already pressed to his ear. The police would be looking for me now, not just for breaking and entering or violating a restraining order, but for making death threats. Every small victory I'd achieved had become a new crime. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was inadmissible because of how I'd obtained it. I spent that night in a truck stop bathroom, afraid to sleep in my car where police might find me. The competency hearing was tomorrow. No lawyer would take my case now. The court-appointed attorney I'd been assigned had left 3 voicemails saying he needed to meet with me before the hearing, but I was too afraid to show up anywhere official. The courthouse steps felt like Mount Everest the next morning. I changed into my cleanest clothes, tried to make myself look stable and sane. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. The same room where Aunt Martha's estate had been settled a year ago. Augustine was already there, sitting in the exact same chair he'd occupied during that hearing. My court-appointed lawyer met me at the defendant's table, his expression grim. He'd reviewed the case file, the restraining order violation, the breaking and entering, the recorded death threat, the documented history of mental health treatment as a child. He suggested I consider accepting whatever treatment plan the court recommended. Augustine took the stand first. He presented himself as the concerned older brother, worried about my escalating behavior. He produced documentation going back years. The destroyed skateboard became evidence of my destructive tendencies. The science fair incident showed my need for attention at any cost. Every interaction we'd ever had was reframed through the lens of my supposed mental illness. When my turn came, I tried to present my evidence, but the judge stopped me, explaining that illegally obtained documents weren't admissible. My lawyer tried to argue for their relevance, but Augustine's lawyer countered that my methods of obtaining them only proved my paranoid and criminal behavior. Then Augustine's lawyer played the recording of my threat. My own voice filled the courtroom, desperate and unhinged, talking about doing to Augustine what he'd done to Aunt Martha. Without context, without the evidence to back it up, I sounded exactly like what they said I was, dangerous and unstable. The judge was about to rule when the fire alarm went off. Someone had called in a threat to the courthouse. As everyone evacuated, I found myself pushed into the stairwell with the crowd. The door slammed shut behind me, and I realized Augustine was right there, pressed against me in the narrow space. We stood face to face as people pushed past us toward the exit. His jacket pocket was open, and I saw something glinting inside. His medical alert bracelet, the same type Aunt Martha had worn, the same allergy that had killed her. I reached for it without thinking, my fingers closing around the metal. He grabbed my wrist, but didn't call out. We stood there, locked in a silent struggle, both of us realizing the implications. If I took the bracelet, I'd have evidence but would have committed assault. If he kept it, he'd maintain his cover, but I'd know the truth. Around us, people continued evacuating, oblivious to our frozen tableau. The bracelet fell to the floor between us. We both looked down at it, then at each other. In that moment, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. He knew I could destroy him, just as he could destroy me. We'd reached mutually assured destruction. The crowd thinned out, leaving us alone in the stairwell. Augustine picked up the bracelet and pocketed it. We walked out together in silence, returning to the courtroom once the all-clear was given. The judge, frustrated by the interruption, decided to expedite his ruling. But before he could speak, Augustine's lawyer stood up. He proposed a solution. Both parties would agree to a sealed juvenile diversion program. No criminal charges would be filed if both siblings agreed to counseling and a permanent no-contact order. The records would be sealed, protecting both of our futures. I looked at my lawyer, who nodded slightly. It wasn't justice, but it was survival. I agreed to the terms, signing the documents with Aunt Martha's pen that I'd kept in my pocket. Augustine signed too, his hands steady as always. The judge accepted the agreement with obvious relief. As we left the courtroom, our parents stood in the hallway. Mom was crying. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years. They'd heard enough to know that neither of their children was innocent. The family they'd tried so hard to protect was already destroyed. Over the next weeks, the aftermath unfolded predictably. Dad moved into an apartment downtown. Mom started therapy. The house felt too big for just her and Augustine, but he'd won that too. The inheritance from Aunt Martha, the house, the remnants of our family, all his. The community split into camps. Some believed I was the victim of a master manipulator. Others saw me as a dangerous stalker who'd threatened my cancer survivor brother. Most just wanted to forget the whole ugly mess. The local paper ran one story about the family tragedy before moving on to other news. I enrolled in community college 3 states away, using what little money I had left to start over. The MIT dream was dead, but at least I was free. On my last day in town, a package arrived at the motel where I was staying. No return address, but I knew who it was from. Inside were the broken pieces of my dragon skateboard from 5 years ago, and underneath them, a letter. Not from Augustine, but from MIT, dated 3 months ago. A rejection letter. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The acceptance letter my parents had found, the one that had started this whole nightmare, it had been fake. Augustine had created it, planted it for them to find, knowing exactly how I'd react, how they'd react, how everything would unfold from that moment. The MIT acceptance had never been real. I'd never gotten in. Everything that followed, the fake cancer, the systematic destruction of my life, the legal battles, all of it had been built on a lie I'd believed because I'd wanted so desperately for it to be true. I sat on the motel bed, holding the pieces of my broken skateboard and the rejection letter, finally understanding the depth of Augustine's game. He hadn't just stolen my future, he'd made me complicit in destroying a future that had never existed. Every achievement I thought I'd earned, every moment of pride, I'd never know what was real anymore. The cruelest part was that I'd never be able to prove this final manipulation. The fake acceptance letter was long gone, probably destroyed the moment it served its purpose. All I had was the real rejection, which would look like evidence of my delusions if I tried to show anyone. I packed the skateboard pieces and the letter in my car and drove away from everything I'd ever known. In my rearview mirror, the town grew smaller until it disappeared completely. Somewhere behind me, Augustine was probably already planning his next move, his next victim. But I was done playing his games. The community college acceptance was real. I'd checked, double-checked, called the admissions office directly. It wasn't MIT, but it was mine. As I crossed the state line, I made myself a promise. I'd build a life based on what I could verify, what I could trust. It would be smaller than what I dreamed, but it would be true. 3 months later, I was studying in the library when my phone buzzed. An unknown number with my hometown area code. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted it without listening. Some games are only won by refusing to play.